The coffee had gone cold again. I stared at the rim of the mug, watching the thin film that forms when morning becomes afternoon without you noticing. The kitchen felt larger these days, though nothing had changed since Margaret died 3 years ago. Same oak table we'd picked out together in 1987. Same checkered curtains she'd sewn by hand. Same creak in the floorboard by the sink that we'd always meant to fix but somehow never did. I suppose silence has a way of expanding to fill whatever space you give it. The garage door rumbled open across the yard. My neighbor Tom, backing his Buick out for his daily trip to the hardware store. Retirement habits, we called them. Things you do to convince yourself the day has structure. My own habits were simpler. Coffee at 6, newspaper by 7, and an hour in my workshop before the phone started ringing with people trying to sell me things I didn't need. Except today, the phone had rung at 8:30. Ethan's name on the caller ID, the first time in 6 weeks. Dad. His voice carried that particular weight it gets when he needs something, not the easy warmth from when he was 12, asking if we could throw the baseball in the backyard. This was the voice of a man calculating the cost of pleasantries. Son, I kept my tone neutral, the way you do when you're not sure what's coming. Listen, I was hoping we could get together this weekend. Maybe dinner at our place. Sarah's been asking about you. Sarah, his wife of 2 years, a woman who smiled with her mouth but never her eyes. A woman who called me Mr. Patterson, even after I'd told her 3 times to call me Frank. She had opinions about everything. The way I dressed, the truck I drove, the fact that I still lived in the house where Margaret and I had raised Ethan. That would be nice, I said, though something in his tone suggested nice wasn't the right word for whatever he had planned. Great, Saturday at 6, and Dad? He paused, and I could hear voices in the background, Sarah's among them. Could you maybe wear that blue shirt, the one Mom got you for your birthday a few years back? Margaret had been gone 3 years. Any shirt she'd bought me was older than his marriage. After I hung up, I sat looking at the phone like it might ring again and offer an explanation. But phones don't explain things. They just carry voices across distances that sometimes feel wider than geography. I walked through the living room, past the mantel where Margaret's photograph smiled from its silver frame. She'd been laughing when I took that picture, head thrown back at something Ethan had said during his college graduation dinner. He'd been 22 then, full of plans and certainties. He was going to change the world, he said. Start his own business, make enough money to take care of us when we got old. The boy in that photograph had believed in taking care of people. The man who just called me sounded like he believed in something else entirely. Saturday evening came with the kind of October chill that makes you grateful for jacket pockets. I'd found the blue shirt Margaret bought me, still crisp, still carrying the faint scent of her perfume from the closet they had shared. Driving across town to Ethan's subdivision, I passed the old neighborhoods where houses sat on lots big enough for gardens and swing sets. His development was different. Cookie-cutter colonials packed tight as dominoes, each one beige or taupe or some other color that meant nothing. Ethan's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, 2 stories of vinyl siding and architectural details that looked expensive but felt hollow, the kind of place that cost more than it was worth, in a neighborhood where the HOA had opinions about your mailbox. Sarah answered the door wearing a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Her smile was practiced, perfect, and completely empty. "Frank," she said, stepping back to let me in. "So glad you could make it." The foyer smelled like vanilla candles and new carpet. Everything was beige and cream and gold, the kind of decorating that looked like it came from a magazine and felt just as lived in. Through the archway, I could see Ethan in the kitchen, wearing a burgundy sweater and an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dad," he said, coming forward with his arms open for a hug that felt more like a business transaction. "You look good." I'd looked better. The face in my mirror that morning had shown me a man of 72, with lines carved deep by work and grief, and the particular exhaustion that comes from raising a child who grows up to become a stranger. "House looks nice," I said. Because it was true, and because commenting on their success seemed like the safe topic, Sarah beamed. "We've been working so hard on it. The decorator just finished the living room last month." A decorator, for a house that already looked like every other house on the street. "Must have cost a pretty penny," I said. Something flickered across Ethan's face. "Well, you know how it is. Sometimes you have to invest in your future. We sat down to dinner in a dining room that felt more like a showroom than a place where people ate. The table could have seated 8, though I couldn't imagine Ethan and Sarah having enough friends to fill it. The chandelier cast everything in a golden light that made the whole room look like it was trying too hard. Sarah had made pot roast, though it tasted like it had come from a package with instructions. Margaret's pot roast had been different, slower, richer, with carrots that fell apart and gravy that could cure whatever ailed you. This tasted like an approximation of the real thing. "So, Dad," Ethan said, cutting his meat with surgical precision, "we wanted to talk to you about something." There it was, the reason for the dinner, the phone call, the blue shirt request. I set down my fork and waited. "Sarah and I have been doing really well," he continued. "The business is growing. We love the house. Everything's falling into place. That's good to hear." "The thing is," Sarah chimed in, her voice sweet as artificial honey, "we're at a point where we need to make some bigger financial moves. Investment opportunities, you know?" I didn't know, but I nodded anyway. "The mortgage on this place," Ethan said, gesturing around the pristine dining room, "it's pretty substantial, and with interest rates the way they are." He trailed off, waiting for me to fill in the blanks. When I didn't, he pressed on. "We were hoping you might consider helping us out, just temporarily, until some of our investments mature." "What kind of help?" Sarah leaned forward, her smile brightening. "Well, we thought maybe you could co-sign for a refinance, or maybe take out a small loan against your property." My property. The house where Margaret and I had lived for 43 years. Where we'd brought Ethan home from the hospital, where we'd nursed him through chicken pox and helped him with homework and taught him to drive in the driveway. Where Margaret had died in our bedroom, holding my hand and telling me to take care of myself. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Ethan and Sarah exchanged a look. "Maybe $150,000, he said. "Like I said, just temporarily." $150,000, more money than I'd made in 3 years when Ethan was growing up. More money than Margaret and I had ever had in our bank account at one time. "That's a lot of money, son." "It's really not, though," Sarah said, her voice taking on an edge of impatience. "I mean, considering what your house is worth, and with Ethan being your only child." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like smoke, considering that someday it would all be his anyway. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy who'd helped me build a treehouse in the backyard. The teenager who'd called me from college every Sunday. Homesick and grateful for the sound of a familiar voice. The young man who'd asked me to be his best man because he couldn't imagine getting married without me standing beside him. That person was gone. In his place sat a stranger in an expensive sweater, asking me to mortgage my memories so he could keep up with a lifestyle he couldn't afford. "I'll need to think about it," I said. Ethan's smile faltered. "Dad, we really need an answer soon. The bank requires—" I said I'll think about it. The silence that followed was different from the expanding silence of my empty kitchen. This was the compressed silence of disappointment, of plans derailed, of a conversation that wasn't going according to script. Sarah recovered first. "Of course," she said, her smile snapping back into place like a rubber band. "We understand this is a big decision." But her eyes said something else entirely. Her eyes said she'd already spent the money in her mind, already planned how my equity would solve their problems and upgrade their lifestyle. We finished dinner, making small talk about the weather and the neighborhood and anything except the elephant that had taken up residence at the table. When it was time to leave, Ethan walked me to the door. "Dad," he said, his hand on my shoulder, "I know this is a lot to ask, but we're family. Family helps family. Family helps family." The words echoed in my head as I drove home through the dark suburban streets. Margaret had said the same thing once, when Ethan was struggling in his first job out of college and we'd helped him with rent. When he'd wanted to go to graduate school and we'd dipped into our retirement savings. When he'd needed a down payment for his first apartment and we'd quietly taken out a small loan. Family helps family, but somewhere along the way, it had become a one-way street. Back home, I sat in Margaret's chair, the green recliner by the window where she'd done her crossword puzzles and watched the birds at the feeder. The house felt smaller now, contracted back to its normal size, but the silence felt different, not empty exactly, just waiting. I picked up the framed photograph from the side table. Margaret and Ethan at his high school graduation, both of them grinning at something outside the camera's view. She'd been so proud that day, so certain he would grow up to be a good man. Maybe he still could be. Maybe this was just a rough patch, a moment of poor judgment influenced by a wife who valued appearances over character. Or maybe this was exactly who he'd become, and I was the only one still pretending otherwise. The coffee mug sat cold and forgotten on the kitchen counter, a reminder of the morning when I'd still thought my son might call just to hear my voice. If you want to see part 2, comment next to let us know. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of October day that makes you feel winter settling into your bones. I'd slept poorly, turning over the dinner conversation like a man examining a photograph for details he'd missed the first time. The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. Not just the request for money, but the choreography of it all. The decorator-perfect house, Sarah's practice smile, even the request that I wear Margaret's shirt. It had been a performance, and I'd been the audience. I made coffee and toast, the same breakfast I'd eaten for 3 years now, ever since Margaret's kitchen routines had become just mine. Through the window above the sink, I could see the bird feeder she'd hung from the oak tree, still swaying empty in the morning breeze. I'd stopped filling it after she died. Somehow, it felt wrong to keep feeding the cardinals and chickadees she'd loved when she wasn't there to watch them. The phone rang as I was washing my single plate and coffee mug. Ethan again? Morning, Dad. Sleep well? There was an eagerness in his voice that made my stomach tighten, the tone of a salesman who thinks he's got his customer hooked. Well enough, I said. Listen, I was thinking about our conversation last night. I know it's a big decision, but I wanted you to know we've already talked to the bank. They said with your credit score and the equity in your house, the whole process could be wrapped up in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? They'd already talked to the bank before they'd even asked me. Son, I said slowly, you went to the bank before you talked to me. Well, not exactly. I mean, we just wanted to know what our options were, you understand. I understood more than he realized. I also wanted to let you know, Ethan continued, that we'd be happy to have you move in with us if keeping up the house becomes too much. Sarah mentioned it last night after you left. She thinks it might be nice for you to have company. Move in with them, in their beige house with their decorator furniture and their vanilla candles. Live in their guest room like a dependent relative, grateful for their charity. That's thoughtful, I said, though thoughtful wasn't the word that came to mind. Great. So maybe we could get together again this week, go over the paperwork. I'm still thinking about it, Ethan. But Dad, the bank said, the bank can wait. After I hung up, I walked through the house that Margaret and I had made together, past the living room where we'd watched Ethan take his first steps, through the hallway lined with pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and summer vacations at the lake, into the bedroom where we'd slept side by side for 40 years, where I'd held her hand as she slipped away. Every room held ghosts of our better times, when family meant something different than it seemed to mean now. I found myself in Ethan's old bedroom, unchanged since he'd left for college 25 years ago. The same baseball posters on the walls, the same desk where he'd done homework while Margaret called him down for dinner, the same bookshelf filled with Hardy Boys mysteries and science fiction novels he'd read by flashlight under the covers. On the desk sat a picture of the 3 of us at the lake house we'd rented every summer when he was growing up. Ethan must have been 14, all elbows and knees and that gap-toothed grin that lit up his whole face. Margaret was laughing at something I'd said, her arm around Ethan's shoulders. I was squinting into the sun, but smiling, surrounded by the 2 people who'd made my world complete. That boy in the picture had wanted to be like me, had followed me around the garage, asking questions about how engines worked and why screws turned clockwise and whether he could help with whatever project I was working on. He'd been proud when his friend's parents mentioned that his dad was the best mechanic in town, the one who could fix anything and never charge more than it was worth. When had that pride turned into embarrassment? When had my calloused hands and work shirts become something to be ashamed of instead of respected? I thought about the morning Margaret died, how Ethan had driven down from the city, arriving just as the hospice nurse was packing up her supplies. He'd looked around our bedroom, at the medical equipment, the pill bottles, the tissues scattered across the nightstand, and said, "Dad, you should have called me sooner. You shouldn't have handled this alone." But I hadn't been alone. I'd been with the woman I'd loved for 43 years, holding her hand and telling her it was okay to let go. There had been nothing lonely about it, nothing I'd needed help handling. Ethan had stayed for the funeral, of course, had given a beautiful eulogy about Margaret's grace and kindness, and the way she'd made everyone feel like family. But even then, I'd caught him checking his phone during the service, answering text messages from Sarah about some crisis at their business that couldn't wait. After the reception, he'd pulled me aside. "Dad, I want you to know you don't have to do this alone. Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it might be good for you to have a change of scenery. Maybe sell this place, get a nice condo closer to us." 3 days after we'd buried his mother, and he was already planning to uproot the life we'd built together. "I'm fine here," I'd told him. "But Dad, this house is so big for one person. And the memories were the point. They were all I had left of Margaret, woven into every room, every piece of furniture, every creaking floorboard. Without them, I wasn't a widower rebuilding his life. I was just an old man killing time until his own ending." But Ethan hadn't understood that then, and he clearly didn't understand it now. The phone rang again Tuesday afternoon. Not Ethan this time, but Sarah. "Frank," her voice was sweeter than honey, the way it got when she wanted something. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I just wanted to follow up on our conversation Saturday night." "What about it?" "Well, I've been thinking about your situation, and I really think this could be a wonderful opportunity for everyone, not just financially, but personally too. My situation. As if being a widower was a problem that needed solving." "How's that, Sarah?" "Well, you've been all alone in that big house for 3 years now. That can't be healthy. And Ethan worries about you constantly, whether you're eating right, whether you're getting enough social interaction. If you moved in with us, we could make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of? Like I was an invalid instead of a man who'd been taking care of himself and a family since before she was born. "I appreciate the concern," I said. "And honestly," she continued, her voice taking on a confidential tone, "I think it would be good for Ethan too. He feels so guilty about not being able to help you more. If we could refinance the house, it would free up some money for us to really focus on your needs." My needs. Funny how my needs had suddenly become so important, right when they needed my money. What kind of needs are we talking about? "Oh, better health care, maybe a nice assisted living facility if you decide you want more independence. The kind of place where Margaret would have wanted you to be comfortable." Margaret's name in Sarah's mouth felt like a violation. Margaret, who died in the bedroom we'd shared for 4 decades, who'd made me promise to stay in the house as long as I was able, who'd whispered with her last breath that our home would always be my sanctuary. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up before she could say anything else. That evening, I drove out to Millfield Cemetery where Margaret was buried. The headstone was simple gray granite with her name, dates, and the words, "Beloved wife and mother," carved in letters I'd chosen myself. I'd brought fresh flowers, white roses, her favorites, and spent an hour pulling weeds from around the base. "They want me to mortgage the house," I told her, sitting on the small bench I'd had installed beside her grave. "Your son and his wife think I need taking care of." A cardinal landed on her headstone, bright red against the gray stone. Margaret always said cardinals were signs from people we'd lost, messages that they were still watching over us. "What would you do?" I asked. The cardinal cocked its head, studied me for a moment, then flew away toward the setting sun. But I already knew what Margaret would have said. She'd have told me to trust my instincts the way she always had. She'd have reminded me that love doesn't come with a price tag, and family doesn't require collateral. Driving home in the growing darkness, I thought about the man I'd been when Margaret was alive. A man who'd built a successful repair business from nothing, who'd put a son through college, who'd owned his home free and clear by the time he was 50. A man who'd never asked anyone for help he couldn't repay, who'd earned respect through work and integrity. That man wouldn't have hesitated. That man would have known the difference between helping family and being used by them. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, but not empty. It was full of 43 years of marriage, of a son's childhood, of laughter and arguments and quiet Sunday mornings reading the paper together. It was full of Margaret's voice calling me in for dinner, of Ethan's footsteps racing down the stairs, of all the ordinary moments that had made a life worth living. They could have their beige house and their decorator furniture and their vanilla candles. They could have their mortgage payments and their investment opportunities and their plans for my money. But they couldn't have this. They couldn't have the only thing that mattered anymore, the place where Margaret and I had been happy, where her memory lived in every room, where I could still feel her presence in the way the afternoon light fell across the kitchen table. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in her chair by the window, watching the empty bird feeders sway in the evening breeze. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd fill it again. Margaret would have liked that. She'd always believed in feeding the things that brought beauty into the world, even when, especially when, the world felt cold and gray. The phone didn't ring that evening, which felt like a small mercy. But I knew it would ring again soon. Ethan and Sarah weren't the type to give up easily, not when they thought they were close to getting what they wanted. What they didn't understand was that I'd already made my decision. Not about the money, that had never really been a question, but about something more important, who I was going to be in whatever years I had left. I was going to be the man Margaret had married, the man who knew the difference between love and leverage, between family and transaction, the man who remembered that some things couldn't be bought, borrowed, or refinanced. They were about to learn that lesson themselves. Wednesday brought the kind of rain that turns October into November without asking permission. I stood at the kitchen window, watching water sheet down the glass and pool in the low spots of the yard Margaret had always meant to level. The weather matched my mood, gray, unsettled, heavy with the weight of things that needed doing. The phone had rung twice already before 9 o'clock. Both times, Ethan. Both times, I'd let it go to the machine. His voice on the second message carried an edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager testing boundaries. Dad, I know you're there. We really need to talk about this. The bank appointment is Friday, and they need to know if you're on board. Friday. 3 days away. They'd scheduled the appointment before I'd agreed to anything, as if my consent was a formality rather than a choice. I poured my second cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the morning paper, though the words seemed to swim on the page. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted to the phone, waiting for it to ring again. By 10:30, it did. This time, I answered. Dad. Ethan's voice was tight with forced patience. I've been trying to reach you. I know. Listen, Sarah and I talked it over, and we think maybe you don't understand how good this deal is for you, too. The equity you're sitting on. It's not doing anything just sitting there. Sitting there. As if the house where I'd lived my entire adult life was just an investment gathering dust. It's doing plenty, I said. But Dad, think about it practically. You could take out a home equity line, help us with the refinancing, and still have money left over for yourself. Maybe take that trip to Ireland you and Mom always talked about. Ireland. We'd planned to go for our 50th anniversary before the cancer took that dream away along with everything else. The fact that he remembered hurt more than if he'd forgotten entirely. I'm not interested in traveling alone. Then think about your future. What if you need long-term care? What if the house needs major repairs? Having access to that equity could make all the difference. What if? The language of fear, dressed up as concern. I'll manage. A pause. Then Ethan's voice, colder now. Dad, I'm trying to help you here, but you're not making this easy. I didn't realize I was supposed to make it easy. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. I need to go. Dad, wait. We're coming over tonight. Around 7. We need to sit down and work this out. The line went dead before I could object. They were coming over, to my house, to pressure me in the place where Margaret and I had been happiest, where her presence still lingered in every room. The audacity of it took my breath away. I spent the afternoon preparing, though I wasn't sure for what. I straightened the living room, put fresh coffee in the pot, even dusted the mantel where Margaret's photographs smiled down from their frames. Old habits, maybe, or maybe I wanted them to see what they were asking me to risk. At exactly 7 o'clock, headlights swept across the front windows. Through the curtains, I watched Ethan's BMW pull into the driveway, the same driveway where I'd taught him to ride a bicycle, where Margaret had taken pictures of him before prom, where we'd stood waving goodbye when he left for college. The doorbell rang, though they could have knocked. This was still my house, still my rules, but somehow the doorbell made it feel like they were visitors rather than family. I opened the door to find them standing under the porch light like a delegation. Ethan wore a charcoal suit, the kind he wore to important meetings. Sarah had dressed up too, a navy dress and pearls that caught the light like small, cold stars. Between them stood a man I didn't recognize, elderly but sharp-eyed, carrying a leather briefcase. "Dad," Ethan said, stepping forward. "This is Robert Morrison. He's our financial advisor." Financial advisor. They'd brought professional help to convince me to mortgage my memories. "Mr. Patterson," Morrison said, extending a manicured hand, "I've heard so much about you. Ethan speaks of you with great affection." Great affection. The words felt rehearsed, part of a script they'd all practiced. I shook his hand but didn't invite them in immediately. Let them stand there in the October cold. Let them feel like what they were, strangers asking for favors they hadn't earned. "We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us," Morrison continued. "I know these financial decisions can feel overwhelming, but I think you'll find our proposal quite beneficial." Our proposal, as if I'd asked for their help. Finally, I stepped back and let them into the living room. They settled onto Margaret's sofa, the same couch where she'd read bedtime stories to Ethan, where we'd watched his little league games on television, where she'd folded laundry while humming songs I couldn't name. Morrison opened his briefcase with the efficiency of a man accustomed to important business. "Mr. Patterson, Ethan has explained your situation, and I think we have some excellent options." "My situation?" "Well, you're what we call house rich, cash poor. Significant equity tied up in real estate, but limited liquid assets for emergencies or opportunities. Limited liquid assets. The sanitized language of money, stripping away everything human and personal." "I have what I need," I said. "Of course," Morrison smiled. "But what about what you could have? What about security?" He spread papers across Margaret's coffee table, forms and charts and projections that reduce my home to numbers and percentages. "If we establish a home equity line of credit for, say, $200,000, you'd have access to funds for any emergency. Medical expenses, home repairs, travel, anything you might want or need. 200,000. They'd increased the amount since Saturday's dinner. "And the best part," Sarah chimed in, "is that you wouldn't have to use it unless you wanted to. It's just there as a safety net." "Initially," Morrison continued, "your son would utilize perhaps $150,000 for his refinancing needs. Think of it as an investment in his future, and by extension, yours. An investment in his future. The man sitting in my living room, asking me to mortgage my past so he could secure his tomorrow." "What if I say no?" I asked. Morrison blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Well, of course, that's your prerogative, but I'd hate to see you miss this opportunity. Interest rates are historically low, and given your age—" "What about my age?" "Well, naturally, as we get older, banks become more hesitant to extend credit. This might be your last chance to access your equity while you're still—" He caught himself. "Still what?" "Still in good health," he finished lamely. "Still competent," he'd almost said. "Still capable of making my own decisions." I looked at Ethan, really looked at him. The boy who'd built model airplanes at this same coffee table. The teenager who'd asked my permission before taking a girl to the school dance. The young man who'd called me the night before his wedding, nervous and grateful, and telling me he hoped he could be half the husband I'd been to his mother. "Son," I said quietly, "is this really what you want? To take out a loan against the house where you grew up?" For a moment, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe. Or shame. But Sarah's hand found his knee, and the moment passed. "Dad, it's not taking anything away from you. It's just accessing money that's already there. Money that's already there. As if the equity in my home was just lying around, unused, waiting for someone smart enough to claim it. And if something happens to me, if I can't make the payments—" "That won't happen," Sarah said quickly. "We'd make sure—" "You'd make sure of what? That you'd pay the loan on my house?" The silence that followed was telling. Morrison shuffled his papers. Sarah studied her manicured nails. Only Ethan met my eyes, and what I saw there was the calculation of a man who had already moved past inconvenient questions to more pleasant outcomes. "Dad," he said finally, "you're overthinking this. It's just paperwork, just a formality that helps all of us. Just paperwork. 43 years of marriage, of mortgage payments, of sweat equity and love and loss, reduced to just paperwork." I stood up. "I think you should go." Morrison looked surprised. "Mr. Patterson, Perhaps if we could just review the terms. I said you should go. Sarah's mouth tightened. Frank, I think you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you. No, I said quietly. You're trying to help yourselves. And you're using my grief and my age and my loneliness to make me feel like I owe you that help. Ethan stood too, his face flushing. Dad, that's not fair, isn't it? You bring a stranger into my house with papers already drawn up. Talk about my health like I'm dying. Treat my home like it's just an asset to be leveraged. How is that fair? We're family, Sarah said, her voice rising. Family helps family. Family, I repeated. When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without wanting something? When was the last time you treated me like a father instead of a bank? The questions hung in the air like accusations, which I suppose they were. Morrison cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion for now. Let everyone cool down. There's nothing to table, I said. The answer is no. Ethan's composure finally cracked. Dad, you're making a mistake, a big mistake. We're offering you security, companionship, a chance to be part of something bigger than sitting alone in this old house mourning someone who's never coming back. The words hit like a physical blow. Margaret, who was never coming back, as if I needed reminding, as if my grief was just stubbornness, my loyalty to her memory, just an obstacle to their financial planning. Get out, I said. Dad, get out of my house. They gathered their papers and their briefcase and their wounded dignity. At the door, Ethan turned back. We're trying to help you, Dad, but we can't do that if you won't let us. After they left, I sat in Margaret's chair and listened to the house settle around me. The same sounds I'd been hearing for 43 years, but somehow they felt different now. Not empty, but protective, like the house itself was gathering its strength, preparing for whatever came next. Because something would come next. I could feel it in the way Ethan had looked at me, in the calculation behind Sarah's smile, in the carefully prepared presentation they'd brought to pressure me. They weren't done, and neither was I. The call started the next morning. Not from Ethan, that would have been too direct, but from Sarah. Her voice on the answering machine was wounded, disappointed, like a mother whose child had misbehaved in public. Frank, I hope you'll reconsider. I know last night was emotional, but we really are trying to do what's best for everyone. Please call me back. I didn't call back. Friday afternoon brought a different approach. I was in the garage, organizing tools that didn't need organizing, when I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw a silver Lexus pulling up behind my truck. The driver was a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, professionally dressed, carrying a clipboard. She knocked on the front door with the confident rap of someone accustomed to being answered. When I opened it, she smiled with practiced warmth. Mr. Patterson, I'm Linda Walsh from Sunset Manor Adult Living Community. Your son asked me to stop by. Adult Living Community. The euphemism made my teeth ache. He did he? Oh, yes. He's very concerned about your living situation. Big house like this, all alone. It can't be easy. She peered past me into the hallway, her eyes cataloging what she saw. Mind if I come in? I'd love to show you some information about our community. I mind. Her smile faltered slightly. Mr. Patterson, I understand this is a big decision, but Sunset Manor offers so much. Prepared meals, housekeeping, social activities. You'd have your independence, but with support when you need it. I don't need support. Everyone needs support, sir, especially after a loss like yours. Your son mentioned that your wife passed away recently. Recently. 3 years felt both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. But it wasn't recent enough to justify this intrusion. My son talks too much. He cares about you. He's worried about what might happen if you had a medical emergency here, all alone. What if you fell? What if you left my property before I called the police? That got her attention. The practiced smile disappeared entirely, replaced by the calculating look of a saleswoman whose quota was in jeopardy. Mr. Patterson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your son specifically requested. My son doesn't live here. I do. And I'm asking you to leave. After she drove away, I called Ethan. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. Dad, I hope you had a chance to talk with Linda. She's really wonderful, and Sunset Manor has an excellent reputation. You sent a stranger to my house to convince me to move into a nursing home. It's not a nursing home, Dad. It's independent living with support services. There's a difference. The difference is marketing. Dad, be reasonable. You can't live in that house forever. What happens when you can't manage the stairs? What happens when you need help with daily activities? What happens? What happens? The same language of fear they'd used about money now applied to my body, my future, my inevitable decline. I'll manage. How? By being stubborn until something happens and it's too late? By living my life until I can't anymore? That's not a plan, Dad. That's just wishful thinking. Maybe it was, but it was my wishful thinking, my life, my choice to make. Ethan, I said, I want you to stop. Stop sending people to my house. Stop calling about money and moving and what's best for me. Just stop. I can't do that, Dad. I love you too much to watch you make these mistakes. Love. The word felt strange coming from him now, after everything that had happened in the past week. If you love me, I said, respect my decisions. Even when they're wrong? Especially then. Saturday morning brought the breaking point, though I didn't recognize it at first. I was having coffee and reading the paper when I heard the familiar sound of a key in the front door lock. For a moment, my heart leaped. Margaret, home from grocery shopping, calling out to ask if I wanted anything special for lunch. But it wasn't Margaret. It was Ethan, letting himself into my house as if he still lived here. Dad, he called. Dad, we need to talk. I stayed at the kitchen table, listening to his footsteps in the hallway. When he appeared in the doorway, he was carrying a stack of papers and wearing the expression of a man who'd run out of patience. We need to settle this, he said, setting the papers on the table next to my coffee mug. Today. Settle what? The house, the loan, your future. He pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. Dad, I've been thinking about this all week, and I realize what the problem is. You're scared. Scared of what? Change, moving on, letting go of Mom. Letting go of Mom. As if loving Margaret, honoring her memory, keeping alive the life we'd built together was somehow unhealthy. I'm not letting go of your mother. I'm not moving on from 43 years of marriage because you think I should. But Dad, she's gone. She's been gone for 3 years. At some point, you have to accept that and start living again. Start living again. The phrase felt like a slap. As if the past 3 years, the quiet mornings with my coffee and memories, the evenings in Margaret's chair, the small rituals that kept her close, weren't living at all. I am living. I'm living the life I choose to live. In isolation, in the past. Dad, this isn't what Mom would have wanted for you. There it was, the weapon I'd been waiting for him to use. Margaret's wishes interpreted through his convenience, weaponized to justify his demands. Don't, I said quietly. Don't what? Don't tell me what your mother would have wanted. You didn't know her the way I did. You didn't love her the way I did. And you sure as hell don't get to use her memory to manipulate me. Ethan's face reddened. I'm not manipulating you. I'm trying to save you from yourself. Save me from what? From missing my wife? From wanting to live in the house where we were happy? From refusing to mortgage my memories so you can afford a lifestyle you can't pay for? It's not about the money, isn't it? Then why are all these conversations about loans and equity and refinancing? Why are you sending strangers to my house with papers already drawn up? Why can't you just let me live my life without turning it into a transaction? Ethan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Because your life isn't working, Dad. Look at yourself. Sitting alone in this old house, talking to pictures, living in the past. That's not a life. That's just waiting to die. The words hung between us like a challenge. I looked at my son, the man I'd raised, the boy I'd loved, the stranger who stood in my kitchen telling me my grief was wrong, my choices invalid, my life not worth living on my own terms. Get out, I said. Dad, get out of my house and give me your key. What? You heard me. Give me the key. Dad, you're overreacting. The key, Ethan. He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a brass key on a small ring. The same key I'd given him when he turned 16, when I'd trusted him with access to our home, our sanctuary, our family. I held out my hand. He dropped the key into my palm, the metal still warm from his pocket. Dad, you're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. We're trying to help you. No, you're trying to help yourselves. To my money, to my house, to whatever you think you're entitled to, because I'm your father and Margaret was your mother, and we gave you everything we had for 22 years. That's not... It is exactly that. You look at me and see an inconvenience, a problem to be managed, an old man whose stubborn attachment to his dead wife is keeping you from getting what you want. Ethan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. You want to know what your mother would have wanted? I continued. She would have wanted you to call me on Sundays just to talk. She would have wanted you to visit because you missed me, not because you needed something. She would have wanted you to respect the man who raised you instead of treating him like a resource to be exploited. Dad, please. She would have wanted you to be the son we thought we were raising, kind, decent, loyal. Someone who understood that love doesn't come with conditions or payment plans. Tears were running down his face now, but I couldn't stop. 3 years of grief, a week of manipulation, a lifetime of love betrayed, it all came pouring out. Instead, we raise someone who thinks his father's equity is more important than his father's happiness. Someone who sends strangers to pressure an old man into abandoning the only home he's ever known. Someone who uses his mother's memory as a weapon when simple decency fails. Stop, he whispered. You want me to move on from your mother? Fine, I'll move on from you too. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Ethan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. You meant every word, every calculation, every pressure tactic. The only thing you're sorry about is that it didn't work. He gathered up his papers with shaking hands. At the kitchen door, he turned back one more time. I love you, Dad. No, I said quietly. You love what you think I can do for you. That's not the same thing. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, looking at the key he'd returned. Such a small thing to carry so much weight. The end of trust, the severing of access, the recognition that my son had become someone I no longer recognized. I walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt, then checked the back door, the windows, the garage, securing the house against intrusion, against manipulation, against the kind of love that came with price tags and payment plans. The house felt different now, smaller maybe, but also stronger, like a fortress that had weathered its first siege and discovered its walls were thicker than anyone had imagined. I made fresh coffee and sat in Margaret's chair, watching the afternoon light slant through the windows. Tomorrow I decided I would call someone, not a financial advisor or a nursing home representative or anyone else with papers to sign and futures to sell. I would call a lawyer, a good one. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a storm has passed. I woke before dawn, not from restlessness but from purpose, the kind of focused energy I hadn't felt since Margaret's funeral. For 3 years, I had been drifting through days that felt too long and nights that felt too short. Now, suddenly, I had work to do. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the yellow pages. Yes, I still kept a phone book, much to Ethan's past amusement, and looked up attorneys, not the flashy ones with television commercials and billboards, but the kind Margaret would have chosen, established, reputable, the sort who understood that some things mattered more than money. At 8:30 sharp, I called the law office of Harrison and Associates. The receptionist had the kind of voice that suggested competence without pretension. I need to speak with someone about estate planning, I said, and possibly some other legal matters. Certainly, sir. Mr. Harrison has an opening this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Would that work for you? It would work perfectly. The law office occupied the second floor of a brick building downtown, the kind of place that had been serving honest people for 50 years. The waiting room smelled of leather and old books, with none of the sterile corporate feel of the places where Ethan conducted his business. James Harrison was a man my age, maybe a few years younger, with the kind of steady handshake that spoke of integrity. His office was lined with law books that looked actually read, and his desk held photographs of what appeared to be grandchildren. Mr. Patterson, he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. What can I do for you today? I told him everything. The dinner at Ethan's house, the financial advisor, the nursing home representative, the escalating pressure to mortgage my home. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. I see, he said when I finished. "And what is it you'd like to accomplish?" "I want to protect myself, and I want to protect this house." "From your son?" The words hurt to say, but they were true. "From anyone who thinks they have a claim on what Margaret and I built together." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "There are several approaches we could take. First, we should review your current will and estate planning documents. When were they last updated?" "After Margaret died, 3 years ago." "And your son is listed as your primary beneficiary?" "For everything, yes." "I see. Well, that gives us some options." He leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Patterson, I want to be clear about something. What you're contemplating, changing your estate plans, protecting your assets from family pressure, these are significant decisions. Are you certain this is what you want?" I thought about Ethan's face when he'd demanded my key, about Sarah's calculating smile, about the stranger they'd sent to convince me to abandon my home. "I'm certain." "Very well. Here's what I recommend. First, we establish a revocable living trust. You'll transfer ownership of your house and other assets into the trust, with yourself as the trustee. This gives you complete control during your lifetime, but makes it much more difficult for anyone to pressure you into decisions you don't want to make." "How so?" "Because technically, you won't own the house anymore. The trust will. Someone can't force you to take out a loan against property you don't personally own. They can't claim you're not managing your assets properly if those assets are held in trust." It was elegant in its simplicity. Use the law to protect myself from the very people who claim to love me. What else? We'll also prepare new healthcare directives and power of attorney documents. Right now, I assume your son is designated to make medical and financial decisions if you become incapacitated. Yes, we'll change that. Designate someone else, a trusted friend perhaps, or a professional fiduciary, someone whose judgment you trust and who doesn't have a financial interest in your decisions. I thought about my neighbor Tom, who'd been checking on me since Margaret died, without ever making me feel like a burden. About my old friend Bill from the garage, who called every month just to talk about baseball and politics and the weather. I can think of someone. Excellent. We'll also want to include specific language about your wishes regarding your living situation. If you become incapacitated, where do you want to receive care? In your home with assistance, or in a facility of your choosing? Not one chosen by family members who might have other motivations. Harrison spoke with the calm authority of a man who'd seen these family dynamics play out many times before. I wasn't the first widower to discover that grief made people vulnerable, that love could be weaponized, that family could become predators when enough money was involved. How long will this take? I can have the documents prepared by the end of the week. We'll need to have them properly notarized and witnessed. And then you'll need to actually transfer the assets into the trust. But once it's done, you'll have significant protection. And my son will still inherit everything when you pass away, assuming that's what you want. The trust doesn't disinherit him. It just prevents him from accessing or controlling your assets while you're alive. That evening, I called Tom from next door. He'd been my neighbor for 15 years, a retired electrician who understood the value of honest work and straight talk. "Frank," he said when he picked up the phone, "how are you holding up?" "I'm all right, Tom. Listen, I need to ask you something, and I want you to feel free to say no." "Shoot." I explained about the legal documents, about needing someone to serve as healthcare proxy and backup trustee, someone who would respect my wishes instead of substituting their own judgment. "Of course," he said without hesitation. "Whatever you need. It might put you in an awkward position with Ethan. Frank, I've known you for 15 years. I've watched you take care of Margaret through her illness, seen how you've handled yourself since she passed. If anyone's in an awkward position, it's not me." Wednesday afternoon, Harrison called with an update. "The documents are ready for review," he said, "but I wanted to discuss one additional option with you. Have you considered what you want to happen to your house after you're gone? Ethan gets it. That's what Margaret and I always planned." "I understand, but given recent events, you might want to consider alternatives, or at least conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "Well, you could specify that the house can't be sold for a certain period after your death, or that it must be offered to other family members first, or even that it goes to charity if certain conditions aren't met." I thought about that. About Ethan and Sarah walking through the rooms where Margaret and I had been happy, calculating square footage and market value, planning renovations that would erase every trace of the life we'd built together. Let me think about it. Thursday evening, I drove out to the cemetery to visit Margaret's grave. The October air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. I brought fresh flowers and spent a few minutes pulling weeds from around the headstone. "I'm taking your advice," I told her, standing up for myself, the way you always said I should. A red cardinal landed on her headstone, bright against the gray granite. Margaret always said cardinals were messengers from people we'd lost. "I know you'd want me to forgive him," I continued, "and maybe someday I will. But first, I need to make sure he can't hurt me anymore, that he can't take away everything we built together." The cardinal tilted its head, as if listening, then flew away toward the setting sun. Friday morning, I signed the papers in Harrison's office. My signature, witnessed and notarized, transferring ownership of everything I'd worked for into a trust that would protect it from manipulation, pressure, and greed. "Congratulations," Harrison said as we finished. "You're now legally protected from anyone who might try to take advantage of your situation." "How long before it takes effect?" "Immediately. As of right now, you don't own your house. The trust does. You can't be pressured into mortgaging it, selling it, or using it as collateral because you no longer have the legal authority to do those things." I felt lighter walking out of that office, as if I'd shed a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. For the first time in weeks, the future felt like something I could control rather than something that would be decided for me by people who claimed to know what was best. That afternoon, Ethan called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dad," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I wanted to apologize for last weekend. I said some things I didn't mean." "Did you?" "Of course. I was frustrated, worried about you, but I shouldn't have lost my temper." "What about the things you did mean? The nursing home representative, the financial advisor, the assumption that you could make decisions about my life without consulting me?" Silence. Then, "Dad, we're still family. We can work this out." "Can we?" "Of course we can. Maybe we could have lunch this weekend. Just the two of us. No business talk. Like old times." Like old times, when he was 12 and thought I knew everything. When he was 16 and asked my advice about girls. When he was 22 and called me the night before his wedding, nervous and grateful, and still young enough to believe that love conquered all. "I'll think about it," I said. But I knew I wouldn't. The boy who had called me the night before his wedding was gone, replaced by a man who saw his father as an obstacle to his ambitions, and no amount of apologizing could change that fundamental fact. That evening, I sat in Margaret's chair and looked around the living room, the same furniture we'd chosen together, the same photographs on the mantel, the same worn spot on the carpet where her feet had rested for 40 years. Everything exactly as it had been, but somehow different now. Protected, secure, mine for as long as I lived. And after that, well, I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. The phone rang once more before bedtime. Ethan again, leaving a message on the answering machine. "Dad, I know you're there. We really need to talk. There are some things happening with our finances, some deadlines we're facing. Please call me back." Deadlines, financial pressure, the real reason behind all the concern for my welfare, all the talk about my future and security and what Margaret would have wanted. I didn't call him back. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around me. The same sounds I'd been hearing for 43 years, but somehow they felt different now. Like the house itself was breathing easier, knowing it was safe. The siege began in earnest the following Monday. Not with armies or weapons, but with the persistent warfare of family obligation and manufactured crisis. The phone started ringing before 8 in the morning and didn't stop until well past 10 at night. Sarah called first, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Frank, we really need to talk. There's been a development with our situation, and time is running out." Then Morrison, the financial advisor, leaving detailed voicemails about limited time opportunities and market conditions that would supposedly work in my favor if I acted immediately. Even Linda Walsh from the nursing home called, now claiming there was a special opening at Sunset Manor that wouldn't be available much longer. I let them all go to the answering machine. Their voices filled my house like the buzzing of wasps, urgent and demanding and increasingly desperate. By Tuesday afternoon, the messages had taken on a different tone. Dad, I don't think you understand how serious this is. Ethan's voice crackled through the speaker. If we don't get this financing sorted out by Friday, we're going to lose the house. Everything we've worked for. Please, just call me back. Wednesday brought a new tactic. I was in the garage, pretending to organize tools while actually just enjoying the silence, when I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw a white Honda Accord pulling up. The driver was a young woman I didn't recognize, but her passenger was unmistakable. My sister Carol emerged from the car with the determined stride of a woman on a mission. Carol, who lived 2 hours away and called maybe 3 times a year. Carol, who hadn't visited since Margaret's funeral, but was now standing on my front porch, ringing the doorbell with the persistence of someone who'd been recruited for a cause. I let her ring for a full minute before opening the door. "Frank," she said, pushing past me into the hallway. "We need to talk." The young woman behind her smiled nervously. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Jennifer, Ethan's assistant. He asked me to drive Mrs. Brennan down here because he was concerned you might not take his calls." Ethan's assistant. He'd sent his sister and an employee to apply pressure that he couldn't apply himself. "Carol," I said, closing the door, "this is unexpected." "Is it? Because from what Ethan tells me, you've been acting very strangely lately, refusing to help family, sending people away, making poor decisions about your future." I led them into the living room, where Carol immediately began surveying the space with the critical eye of a woman looking for evidence of decline. She picked up one of Margaret's photographs, studied it for a moment, then set it down with a sigh. "Frank, this house is like a museum. You're living in the past. It's my past to live in. But it's not healthy. Ethan is worried sick about you. We all are. We all. As if there were legions of family members concerned about my welfare, instead of just the ones who'd suddenly materialized when money became involved." Jennifer opened her briefcase. Of course she had a briefcase, and spread papers across Margaret's coffee table. "Mr. Patterson, Ethan asked me to bring these documents for your review. If you could just look them over. The same loan papers, the same equity calculations, the same projections that reduced my life to numbers on a spreadsheet. But now they came with a family member's endorsement, a sister's concern, the implication that refusing to help would make me not just stubborn, but cruel." "Carol," I said, "how much did Ethan offer to pay you to come here?" Her face flushed. "That's insulting, Frank. I came because I care about you." "When's the last time you called me?" "What? Before this week? When's the last time you called, just to see how I was doing?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched until Jennifer cleared her throat and gestured toward the papers. "Perhaps if we could just review the terms." "I want you both to leave," I said. "Frank," Carol's voice rose, "you can't just dismiss family when they're trying to help you." "Family?" I stood up, looking down at my sister, who'd driven 2 hours to pressure me into mortgaging my home for someone else's benefit. "When Margaret was dying, where were you? When I was planning her funeral, making decisions about treatment, sitting by her bedside for weeks, where was this family concern then? I offered to help. You sent a card, Carol. And now, 3 years later, you show up with loan papers because Ethan needs money, and you want to lecture me about family obligation?" Jennifer was stuffing papers back into her briefcase with the efficiency of someone accustomed to meetings that went sideways. "Perhaps we should reschedule." "There's nothing to reschedule," I said. "The answer is no. It was no yesterday, it's no today, and it'll be no tomorrow." Carol stood up, her face tight with anger. "You're being selfish, Frank. Ethan is your son, your only child. If you can help him and you choose not to, what does that say about you?" "It says I learned the difference between helping and enabling, between love and manipulation, between family and transaction. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Carol. It's not fair that Margaret died. It's not fair that I've spent 3 years learning to live alone. And it's not fair that the first time my family shows up to check on me, it's because they want something." After they left, I called Harrison. "They're escalating," I told him, "bringing in family members, employees, anyone who might have leverage." "That's not uncommon," he said. "When financial pressure gets severe enough, people get creative about applying emotional pressure. Are you having second thoughts?" "No, but I want to understand my options if this gets worse." "Well, the trust protects your assets, but it doesn't protect you from harassment. If they continue this behavior, you might consider a restraining order. A restraining order against my own son. The phrase felt surreal, like something that happened to other families, dysfunctional families, not to a man who had spent 22 years raising a boy he'd thought would grow up to honor the values he'd been taught. Thursday evening brought the last desperate gambit. I was making dinner when I heard the familiar sound of a key in the lock. For a moment, I thought Ethan had somehow gotten another copy made. Then I heard voices, plural, and realized what was happening. They had all come. Ethan, Sarah, Morrison, the financial advisor, and two people I'd never seen before. A man in an expensive suit who carried himself like authority, and a woman with the kind of gentle smile that suggested social services. They filed into my living room like an intervention team, arranging themselves with the practiced efficiency of people who'd planned this moment carefully. Ethan held up a hand when I started to speak. "Dad, please, just listen. We've brought some people who can help explain why this is so important." The man in the expensive suit stepped forward. "Mr. Patterson, I'm David Kellerman from First National Bank. I understand there's been some confusion about your son's financing needs." "There's no confusion. He wants me to mortgage my house." I said no. "But perhaps you don't understand the full picture," the woman said. Her voice was soft, therapeutically modulated. "I'm Dr. Susan Walsh, and I specialize in family financial counseling. What I see here is a family under stress, making decisions based on emotion rather than logic." Dr. Walsh, a therapist, brought in to diagnose my resistance as pathology rather than principle. "Mr. Patterson," Kellerman continued, "your son is facing foreclosure on his home. Without immediate action, he and his wife will lose everything they've worked for. As his father, surely you don't want that to happen." Foreclosure. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Not just financial difficulty. Losing the house. Everything they'd worked for. Everything that justified their expensive lifestyle and decorator furniture and vanilla candles. "How much?" I asked. $200,000, Sarah said quickly. "Just temporarily, until we can get back on our feet." 200,000, 50,000 more than they had originally requested, as if my resistance had somehow increased the price of my cooperation. "And if I don't?" Dr. Walsh leaned forward with professional concern. "Mr. Patterson, I think we need to examine why you're resistant to helping your family. Sometimes after a significant loss like your wife's death, people can become protective of their remaining resources in ways that aren't entirely rational. Entirely rational. My grief, my judgment, my autonomy, all called into question by a stranger who'd known me for 10 minutes. "Dr. Walsh," I said quietly, "how much is my son paying you to be here?" Her professional smile faltered. "I beg your pardon? This is an intervention, right? You've all come here together, with prepared speeches and expert opinions, to convince me that my decision is wrong and yours is right. So I'm wondering how much he's paying you to tell me I'm irrational." "Mr. Patterson, I'm here because I care about families in crisis." "No, you're here because someone paid you to diagnose my sanity based on my willingness to give away my money." I stood up, looking around the room at the assembled team of experts and family members, all united in their certainty that my resistance was the problem rather than their pressure. "I want you all to leave," I said. "Dad," Ethan's voice cracked with desperation. "Please, I'm begging you. If you don't help us, we lose everything." "Then you should have thought about that before you spent money you didn't have on a house you couldn't afford. You can't just stand there and watch your own son become homeless." "I'm not making you homeless, Ethan. Your choices are making you homeless. Your decision to live beyond your means, to treat me like a bank instead of a father, to bring strangers into my house to pressure me into giving you money I worked 40 years to earn." Sarah stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Frank, we'll do anything. We'll pay you back. We'll take care of you. You'll what? Treat me like a human being instead of a resource? Show me respect instead of sending people to convince me I'm mentally incompetent. Act like family instead of creditors?" "We are family," Ethan shouted. "No," I said quietly. "Family doesn't do this. Family doesn't gang up on a grieving widower and try to shame him into mortgaging his memories. Family doesn't recruit therapists and bankers and strangers to apply pressure when simple decency fails." I walked to the front door and opened it. "Get out, all of you, and don't come back." Kellerman left first, muttering something about family dynamics and unfortunate situations. Dr. Walsh followed, her professional composure intact, but her mission clearly failed. Morrison gathered his papers with the efficiency of a man accustomed to deals that fell through. Ethan and Sarah lingered in the doorway. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice broken, "I'm sorry it came to this, but I won't forget that you chose money over family." "Neither will I," said. "The difference is, I know which one of us actually made that choice." After they left, I sat in Margaret's chair and listened to the house breathe around me. The same sounds I'd been hearing for 43 years, but somehow they felt different now. Not empty, but clean, like a fever that had finally broken. I made myself a cup of tea and looked at the photographs on the mantel, Margaret laughing, Ethan as a child, the three of us together when we'd been happy. Before money had complicated love, before need had become demand, before family had become transaction. The phone didn't ring that night. For the first time in weeks, it was silent. And so was I. The silence lasted 3 days. 3 days without phone calls, without visitors, without the constant pressure that had made my own home feel like a battleground. I moved through those days with a strange sense of lightness, as if I'd been holding my breath for weeks and could finally exhale. On Thursday morning, I did something I hadn't done since Margaret died. I filled the bird feeder. The cardinals came first, bright flashes of red against the gray October sky. Then the chickadees, chattering and busy as they fought for position at the tiny perches. Margaret would have loved seeing them again, would have spent her morning coffee watching their antics and commenting on their personalities. "You always said they'd come back," I told her photograph on the mantel. "You just didn't mention it would take 3 years." Thursday afternoon brought Tom from next door, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the slightly embarrassed expression of a man who wasn't sure he was doing the right thing. "Helen made too much lasagna," he said, though we both knew Helen had made exactly the right amount for a neighbor who might not be cooking for himself. "That's kind of her. Mind if I come in for a coffee? Haven't seen much of you lately." We sat at the kitchen table, and Tom didn't ask about the week of unusual traffic to my house, or why Ethan's car hadn't been in the driveway recently. He just talked about the weather, about his grandson's soccer season, about the new family that had moved in 3 houses down. Normal conversation, the kind that didn't require anything from me except the pleasure of human company. "Tom," I said as he was getting ready to leave, "I want to thank you." "For what?" "For agreeing to help with those legal documents, for not asking questions, for bringing lasagna when you knew I needed it." He shrugged, but his smile was warm. "That's what neighbors do, Frank. That's what friends do." Friends? When had I forgotten that distinction? When had I started measuring relationships by what people wanted from me instead of what they freely gave? Friday brought a letter in the mail, not a bill or advertisement, but a personal letter addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. The return address was local, an apartment complex across town. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, the kind a child might use for homework. The handwriting was careful, as if the writer had taken time to make sure every word was legible. "Dear Mr. Patterson, you don't know me, but I know who you are. My name is Rebecca, and I work at the Sunset Manor, where they wanted you to move. I heard about what happened from my supervisor, and I wanted you to know something. I see a lot of families go through this, children who think they know what's best for their parents, who can't understand why someone would want to stay in their own home instead of moving somewhere safer and more convenient. I want you to know that what you did, standing up for yourself, refusing to let them pressure you, that took courage. Most people don't. Most people give in because it's easier than fighting their own children. My grandmother lived in her own house until she was 93. She died in the bedroom where she'd slept with my grandfather for 60 years, surrounded by things that mattered to her. That's how she wanted it, and I'm glad she got to choose. I hope you get to choose too. Sincerely, Rebecca Martinez, Rebecca." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where I kept Margaret's important papers. A stranger's kindness, freely given, asking for nothing in return except the hope that I would honor my own wishes. Saturday morning, I drove out to the cemetery. The October air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter. I brought fresh flowers, white roses, Margaret's favorites, and spent an hour pulling weeds and straightening the small American flag I'd placed by her headstone. "I think you'd be proud of me," I told her. "I finally learned to say no." A red cardinal landed on the headstone, bold and bright against the gray granite. It stayed for a long moment, as if listening, then flew away toward the rising sun. Sunday brought an unexpected visitor. I was reading the paper when I heard a car in the driveway. Not the aggressive purr of Ethan's BMW, but the reliable rumble of an older engine. Through the window, I saw a blue pickup truck, battered but well-maintained. The driver was a young man, maybe 30, with work clothes and the kind of honest face that reminded me of myself at that age. He knocked on the door with the polite uncertainty of someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Mike Brennan, Carol's son. Your nephew." Carol's boy. I hadn't seen him since he was a teenager, all elbows and acne and the shy politeness of youth. Now he stood on my porch as a man, with calloused hands and the straightforward gaze of someone who worked for a living. "Mike," I said, stepping back to let him in. "This is a surprise. I hope it's not a bad one." He followed me into the living room, looking around with the kind of appreciation that suggested he understood the value of things built to last. "I wanted to apologize for what my mother did. Coming here with those papers, pressuring you about money, that wasn't right. She was trying to help family. No, she was trying to help herself feel important. Mom's always been jealous of Aunt Margaret, jealous of the life you two built together. When Ethan called asking for help pressuring you, she saw it as a chance to feel needed." His honesty was refreshing after weeks of manipulation disguised as concern. "I didn't come here to make excuses for her," Mike continued. "I came to tell you that not everyone in the family thinks you're wrong. Some of us think you're doing exactly what you should do, which is living your life on your own terms, taking care of what matters to you, not letting people guilt you into giving away things you worked your whole life for." We talked for an hour about his work. He was a carpenter, building custom cabinets. About his wife and 2 young children, about the satisfaction of creating something with your hands that would outlast your lifetime. He asked about Margaret, about the early days of my business, about the house and how we'd made it into a home. "Uncle Frank," he said as he was leaving, "I know this has been hard, but I want you to know. You've got family that respects what you're doing. You're not as alone as you might think." After he left, I sat in Margaret's chair and thought about the difference between family by blood and family by choice, between obligation and love, between pressure and support. Mike had driven an hour to apologize for something he hadn't done, to offer comfort he wasn't required to give. He'd asked for nothing except the chance to show respect. That was what family should feel like. Monday brought a phone call from Harrison, my lawyer. "Frank, I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Any more pressure from your son? It's been quiet for a few days." "Good. That might mean they've accepted your decision. But I want you to be prepared. Sometimes people in financial crisis make desperate choices. If Ethan contacts you again, if he shows up at your house, don't hesitate to call the police if you feel threatened or harassed." "You think it could come to that?" "I hope not, but a man facing foreclosure, with family money just out of reach, it can make people do things they wouldn't normally consider." Tuesday afternoon, I was in the garage when I heard a car door slam. Not in my driveway, but close enough to catch my attention. Through the window, I saw Ethan's BMW parked across the street, and Ethan himself walking slowly toward my front door. He moved differently than he had during his recent visits. Gone was the confident stride, the assumption of welcome. This was the walk of a man who knew he wasn't wanted but had nowhere else to go. I met him at the front door before he could knock. "Dad," he said, and his voice carried a weight I hadn't heard since he was a child. "Can we talk?" He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive clothes wrinkled as if he'd slept in them. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands shook slightly as he spoke. 5 minutes, I said. We stood on the front porch, not in the living room, where Margaret's photographs might witness whatever came next. The October air was cold, but neither of us moved to go inside. "We lost the house," he said, without preamble. "Yesterday. The bank took it." I waited. Sarah left, went back to her parents with her jewelry and her credit cards and half our savings. She said she couldn't be married to someone who couldn't provide for her. Still, I said nothing. "I know you think I deserve this," he continued. "Maybe I do. Maybe this is what happens when you live beyond your means, when you try to buy a lifestyle instead of building a life. His words, not mine. I'm not here to ask for money, he said. I know that bridges burned. I'm not here to apologize because sorry doesn't fix what I broke. I'm here to tell you that you were right. The admission hung between us like a flag of surrender. About what? About everything. About me treating you like a bank instead of a father. About Sarah caring more about money than family. About me forgetting who I was supposed to be. He looked around at the neighborhood where he'd grown up, at the house where he'd learned to ride a bicycle and throw a baseball and trust that his parents would always be there when he needed them. I remember being proud of you, he said. Proud that my dad could fix anything, build anything, make anything work. When did I start being ashamed of that? When did I start thinking money was more important than character? When you married someone who thought so, I said. He nodded slowly. Sarah used to say you were small town, like it was an insult, like building things with your hands, like being satisfied with enough instead of always wanting more, like that made you less than the people in her world. And you believed her. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think I'd outgrown this place, outgrown the values you taught me. I wanted to be someone who mattered in ways that had nothing to do with you or mom or the life you gave me. The honesty was painful to hear, partly because it was true and partly because it had taken losing everything for him to see it. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. I'm staying at a motel looking for work. Real work, not the consulting business that was mostly about convincing people to pay me for things they could do themselves. He managed a weak smile. Maybe I'll remember how to use my hands for something besides signing checks. And us? He looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the boy who'd once asked for help with his homework, who'd trusted me to know the answers to questions he couldn't solve himself. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I don't expect you to forget what I did, how I treated you. But maybe someday you won't hate me quite as much as I hate myself right now. I never hated you, son. I hated what you became. Those aren't the same thing. For the first time in weeks, something genuine flickered across his face. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. I should go, he said. I just wanted you to know that you were right to say no. Right to protect yourself from people like who I was. He turned to leave, then stopped. Dad, the bird feeder. I noticed it's full again. Your mother would have wanted it that way. She always said the cardinals were messages from people we'd lost. She did. Maybe she was trying to tell you something about forgiveness, about second chances. I watched him walk back to his car, this stranger who wore my son's face but spoke with something closer to my son's heart. He drove away slowly, like a man with nowhere urgent to be. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Margaret's chair. Through the window, I could see the bird feeder swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. As I watched, a cardinal landed on one of the perches, bright red against the gray October sky. It stayed for a long moment, as if it had something to say. Then it flew away toward the setting sun, leaving me alone with the quiet that comes after storms have passed and the air has finally cleared. The phone didn't ring that evening, but for the first time in months, the silence felt like peace instead of emptiness. 3 months later, on a gray January morning that felt more like an ending than a beginning, I received a letter that changed everything. The envelope was plain white, addressed in careful handwriting that took me a moment to recognize. Not Ethan's hurried scrawl, but something more deliberate, more considered. The return address was a post office box in a town 40 miles away. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a smaller envelope marked "For later." Dad, I'm writing this on New Year's Day, sitting in a studio apartment that costs $300 a month and smells like the pizza place downstairs. It's not much, but it's honest. I can afford it with the job I found at Morrison Construction. Yes, the same Morrison who used to work with you 20 years ago. He remembered me as Patterson's boy and gave me a chance despite everything. I'm learning to frame houses again. My hands are getting soft from all those years pushing papers around, but the muscle memory is still there. You taught me well, even if I forgot for a while. I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about what you said on the porch that day, about hating what I became, not who I was. I've been trying to remember who I was before I decided it wasn't enough. I remember building the treehouse with you when I was 8. How you let me use the real hammer, even though I bent more nails than I drove straight. How you never got impatient when I made mistakes, just showed me the right way and let me try again. I remember the Saturday mornings in your garage, learning to change oil and replace brake pads. How you always said a man should know how to fix what he depends on. I remember Mom in the kitchen, humming while she cooked. And how you'd sneak tastes of whatever she was making, and she'd swat your hand away but smile while she did it. How you'd look at her like she was the most amazing thing you'd ever seen, even after 20 years of marriage. I want to be that man again. The one who built things instead of buying them. The one who was proud of calloused hands and honest work. The one who knew the difference between wanting something and needing it. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I'm asking anyway. Not for money or help or forgiveness I haven't earned. I'm asking for time. Time to prove that the boy you raised is still in here somewhere, buried under years of bad choices and worse priorities. The smaller envelope is something I wrote for Mom. I know you visit her grave every month. If you think she'd want to hear it, maybe you could read it to her. If not, throw it away. That's your choice to make. I won't call or visit unless you invite me. But if you ever want to see whether Morrison Construction's newest apprentice carpenter has remembered which end of a hammer to hold, you know where to find me. Your son, Ethan. I read the letter twice, then set it aside and picked up the smaller envelope. Inside was another sheet of paper, covered with the same careful handwriting. Mom, I've been trying to figure out how to talk to you since you died, and I finally realized the problem. I keep trying to apologize to the mother I remember, but I need to apologize to the woman you actually were. You raised me to be better than I became. You taught me that character mattered more than success. That family was about love, not leverage. You showed me every day what it looked like to put other people's happiness before your own. I threw all of that away for a woman who valued me for what I could provide instead of who I was. I hurt Dad in ways that would have broken your heart. I became someone you wouldn't have recognized, someone you wouldn't have been proud to call your son. But here's what I want you to know. Dad never stopped being the man you married. Even when I was trying to take advantage of his grief, his loneliness, his love for you, he stayed true to everything you built together. He protected your home, your memory, your values. He's still the man who brought you flowers every Friday for 40 years. He's still the man who sits in your chair and talks to your picture like you're right there listening. He's still the man who fills the bird feeder because you would have wanted him to. I hope someday I can be half the man he is, half the man you raised me to be. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry it took losing everything to remember how much. Ethan, I sat in Margaret's chair for a long time after reading both letters, watching the winter light fade through the windows. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, dusting the yard where Margaret had planted bulbs that would bloom again come spring. The bird feeder hung empty. I'd forgotten to fill it that morning. But as I watched, a cardinal landed on the wooden perch anyway, bright red against the white snow. It stayed for a moment, head cocked as if listening for something, then flew away toward the gray sky. That afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery. The headstone was nearly buried in snow, but I brushed it clean and laid fresh flowers at the base. White roses, Margaret's favorites, bright against the winter landscape. He wrote you a letter, I told her, pulling the folded paper from my coat pocket. Says he's learning to build things again instead of just buying them. I read Ethan's letter aloud, my voice carrying across the quiet cemetery. When I finished, another cardinal appeared, landing on Margaret's headstone and staying long enough for me to wonder if she was listening after all. What do you think? I asked. Is it too late for second chances? The cardinal flew away without answering, but I thought I knew what Margaret would have said. She'd always believed in redemption, in the possibility that people could change if they wanted it badly enough. Driving home through the falling snow, I made a decision. Not forgiveness, that would have to be earned over time, but something simpler and more difficult, hope. Tomorrow, I would drive 40 miles to a construction site where a man who used to be my son was learning to build things again. I would bring coffee and sandwiches, the way I used to when he helped me with weekend projects. I would see whether Morrison Construction's newest apprentice carpenter had remembered which end of a hammer to hold. And maybe, if we were both very careful and very patient, we might remember how to be father and son again. The snow continued to fall as I pulled into my driveway, covering the world in the kind of pristine white that makes everything look possible again. Inside, I filled the bird feeder and made myself dinner, listening to the house settle around me with its familiar sounds. For the first time in years, I wasn't just waiting for tomorrow. I was looking forward to it. If you want a different ending, type change.